Hello, I'm Andy Vought, and today I wanted to talk about some of my thoughts on True Perception by Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who I've been reading quite a bit this past year. And this particular book is a selection of Dharma art teachings from the 70s. They're like courses, seminars, public talks, and discussions presented by Trungpa Rinpoche in a variety of settings throughout North America. And I'm just going to be sharing some of my notes about this. I wanted to discuss a little bit about this book because it's important in terms of how I think about the artistic process as a musician and also a meditation practitioner and more broadly as a human being. So while the book is focused on artistic process, it also applies to all areas of life. And also it's interesting to see how these teachings still apply today, and perhaps even more so than when he gave the talks. So I'm not reviewing the book, but just trying to give more of a reader response as someone that has been a long-time meditator and an artist. And in this case, I'm thinking more about how to apply what he's talking about to music, maybe more specifically songwriting and composition, and also, of course, lyrical content. So he says the basic problem in artistic endeavor is the tendency to split the artist from the audience and then try to send a message from one to the other. And when this happens, art becomes exhibitionism. And I agree with that, and it reminds me of the futility of trying to create a work of art in order to please someone else or like an imagined audience that's going to be impressed. And what ends up being created in that case is something that's really not genuine, although it might be able to be sold in the marketplace. But also maybe it has value in that sense, but it's not something that is going to necessarily help society in any way. So one of the key teachings in this book that I found really helpful is that of giving up an aggressive attitude. So he says, we give up aggression both toward ourselves, that we have to make a special effort to impress people, and toward others, that we can put something over on them. A genuine art, or Dharma art, is simply the activity of non-aggression. And I find it a real challenge to embrace this kind of attitude when American society seems to really push an aggressive mindset as a way of succeeding. But I think what needs to be distinguished is the difference between aggression and simply being disciplined in one's approach to work and being able to communicate well. Particularly, if you're a meditator, you'll find that aggression can rebound on you, and that can make your interior life more difficult. And he says further, aggression might produce a so-called extraordinary work of art, but art produced in such a way pollutes the world rather than producing something refreshing and healthful. And the purpose of Dharma art is to try to overcome aggression. So my experience of aggression is that it fuels restlessness, which is a hindrance to meditation. And if I bring an aggressive attitude into my meditation, it's going to be a long, hard struggle. He says we can move freely around our world without trying to change it particularly, but just expressing what needs to be expressed or uncovering what needs to be uncovered by means of our art. So there's no expectation of changing the world, and I have no such expectations, but just expressing what needs to be expressed. And a need is something necessary. And so I just kind of question how much music coming out today is actually necessary or helpful to our culture. And what I see in today's society is many people are hurting, and finding themselves living in a meaningless kind of way. And I also think that music can be a reflection of that, but unfortunately it has reached the point where the music itself can fail to inspire us out of this desperate feeling of being trapped. So when music becomes completely meaningless and unhelpful and only targeted to a certain age group, it's no wonder that most adults stop listening to new music at a certain age, because they've grown out of it and they assume that any new music is for the younger generation. He says you can create what's known as enlightened society by works of art, by basic sanity, and also by artists beginning to practice sitting meditation. I think this is an important point, because if artists cannot bring anything from their own personal experience that is of value to the greater society they live in, then their art becomes frivolous and meaningless, and it adds no value to society. So in my experience, sitting meditation is a discipline, and that's a virtue sorely lacking in our society, especially if it has anything to do with spirituality, because many people view spiritual practice as, simply a waste of time, because there is nothing tangible produced by sitting meditation. However, what sitting, standing, or walking meditation is for me is not just a discipline, but it's the development of honesty and respect for this life experience. It's very hard to sit and be dishonest with yourself. You wouldn't want to do that for very long because of how uncomfortable it is. And you'd much rather be doing anything other than that. And I think that's why many people who try meditation, they quit early and they don't stick with it because it just feels too hard. So in a lyrical sense, being able to just sit in silence, it allows many different types of thoughts and emotions to arise that you otherwise may not have been aware of. And when you give space to thinking and emotions, then they don't overwhelm, but they're seen within the perspective of spaciousness. So a particular thought or emotion is no longer you. It's no longer you. It's just one transient thought in space, because no thoughts last. They come and go, and when you're watching this, you realize how ephemeral the nature of thought is, and there's nothing there to identify with anymore that you could call a particular self or the essence of who you are. And that's very freeing and can really open the door to many possibilities when you're trying to write from this sense of freedom and spaciousness. And then you're bringing something of value to the rest of society that isn't forced or dominated by neurosis. Trungpa Rinpoche defines neurosis as that state of mind which fixates and holds on to things. So I would add that a result of that is kind of just depressed and anxious emotional states. He says that these three types of experience, passion, aggression, and ignorance, occur in our minds because behind all that there is a governing factor, which is our belief in I, me. Like me or I is not very visionary. It's very personal. It's very domestic and very petty. I would like to do certain things. I would like to experience certain things. So whenever the word I flashes in our mind, our experience is that we are willing to employ any one of those three convenient tactics: passion, aggression, or ignorance. And we're willing to employ any of those possible tactics so that I can be preserved. And in that way, I cannot be challenged. I cannot be manipulated by such undesirable situations as the non-existence of I, or the possibility of giving up territory altogether. So this is really, it's the basis of aggressive defensiveness and the tendency to always be looking out for what to reject. And I'll just say it's ingrained in me to, not let anything or anyone in that I don't like for fear that I will be corrupted or perhaps taken advantage of or criticized unfairly. So it is important as an artist to be aware of this I that's behind the aggression. And they say the beginning of wisdom is to simply admit that you're not wise. And I'm certainly willing to admit that I don't feel all that wise. I'm just saying this to clarify how I'm interpreting his use of the word ignorance as not knowing things as they are. Instead, I only know them as I want them or expect them to be, which again only fuels the fire of aggression and defensiveness as soon as I encounter the world as not meeting my expectations for how things should be. And notice how the investment in I is a very blinding factor, and it's a great temptation for most artists. And I would say most artists are going to struggle with this, and many have failed. I've seen it over and over again where I cannot be challenged due to ego. So once ego takes complete control over a person, you can no longer have a real conversation with that person. And it is the downfall of so many artists, or anyone, that works in a particular role in the world, because at that point they are not seeing clearly anymore, but only what they want to see. And as a result, what they are bringing to the world is only the projection of their own ego. And it's simply, here's my great ego and how I think things should be, so just get out of my way and don't question my authority, because I'm way up here and on my great throne, talking down to you little simpletons down there who have no idea what it takes to be a true artist. But again, as I may have mentioned before, there are some imposters, in the world of art who are not true artists. They are business people, and they are successful, and they have lots of money, fame, whatever, but I don't listen to them because they aren't producing anything of value for me to listen to or relate to. And that's why when you hear interviews with some of these so-called artists, you never hear anything about what their actual vision is for their art. It's simply a conversation about business, what their plans are for the next thing they're going to do, or where they are going to appear next. But they have no idea why they are doing all this. So one of the best ways to see I is through meditation, because at that point we can see the flow of thinking going on and can disidentify with all those thoughts as being a solid self. So when we bring that into our artistic, creative endeavors, it becomes an expression of reality that is universal rather than from a limited perspective of ego trying to dominate the world of the person listening. So one way to tell that ego is in control of the artist is that the artist does not care at all about, the person listening to the music, or whether what they are putting out there is healthy or helpful in any way. So I'm not saying that the artist should pander to the listener, but if what you're putting out insults my intelligence, I doubt I'm going to continue to listen. And I'm saying that not from ego, but just from basic intelligence. And that's what we're talking about developing and using. He says, you could try to continue your artwork and your meditation together, whatever you do in your life and whatever job you might have. And I don't think you learn Dharma art, you discover it. And you do not teach Dharma art, but you set up an environment so it can be discovered. And that's very true. And I might add that I will always be a student, and if I am teaching anybody, it's myself first. And to think that I'm teaching someone else could easily turn into arrogance or solidifying an identity as if, I am the teacher and you are the student, as if I'm above you, when that's really not the case. And as he mentions, I never learned Dharma art. It just so happened that my artistic endeavors happened to become influenced by my interest in wisdom teachings and the practice of meditation. I see the Dharma and meditation practice as informing my art, and I'm much more careful than I used to be about, just vomiting up my emotions onto a canvas and just calling that art. And that can become very exhibitionist and limiting. And I could do that all day, and it could become very repetitive and boring with no insight whatsoever. And that's why, in order to put into practice what he is talking about, it does require many different ingredients, such as time, discipline, sense of open-mindedness, and a willingness to experiment and learn. So the joy of creating art comes from discovery rather than me trying to impose my will or agenda onto a guitar or a keyboard. There has to be a sense of play and of listening to what's happening rather than just having a preconceived idea and just taking 100% control and guiding every single note towards what could be a very bad song that doesn't inspire anybody. That could easily happen. He says, as artists, we have the responsibility of raising the mentality of the audience, and people might have to reach out with a certain amount of strain, but it's worth it. And the whole civilization then begins to raise its level of sophistication. And it is possible that the first attempt will be a failure. You might not get enough people in the audience to work that way, but gradually they will pick up on it. And I agree. Unfortunately, I feel that this responsibility is not acknowledged by many artists today, especially some of the more popular mainstream ones, and it's mainly because they don't want that responsibility. And I've seen, blatant disregard for the audience, and it's like the artist truly does not care about who is listening or their well-being. Trungpa Rinpoche says, when we begin to perceive the phenomenal world with that sense of basic goodness, peace, and beauty, conflict begins to subside, and we start to perceive our world clearly and thoroughly. There are no questions, no obstacles. And as anxiety subsides, sense perceptions become workable because they are no longer distorted by any neurosis. I love that word, workable. With that understanding, meditation practice becomes very powerful. And through the practice of meditation, we can relate with our thoughts, our mind, and our breath, and begin to discover the clarity of our sense perceptions and our thinking process. The ground of the true artist includes peace and coolness, as well as unconditional beauty, and it is free from neurosis. I'll just say here that I don't feel that I have, 100% transcended my neurosis, and it would be foolish for me to pretend that I have. However, in my experience, meditation does allow me to see neurotic thinking more clearly and in a more objective way, with more spaciousness, instead of just buying into it. And I would agree, when you start to perceive the basic goodness of the world, then you're in a much better position to create something positive that can reach other people and help connect with people. When you perceive the world as a bad place with bad people, it's like everything shuts down. Your generosity shuts down, your sense of defensiveness is strengthened, and you feel imprisoned by your neurosis. He says we are trying to work to create a decent society where the work of art is respected and regarded as very sacred and does not become completely mercenary. And I think this is hitting on 2 points. One, we have a basic motivation for creating art, and this type of motivation will hold steady when there's no other motivation left. And the other point is that it's not completely mercenary. So in my opinion, music shouldn't be strictly for money or fame at the expense of ethics. Not polluting the world is the point. He says the suggestion that you practice sitting meditation before you execute a work of art is obviously a good one, but it does not mean that you have to become a Buddhist. And this is also an important point, although I will say that Buddhist teachings have helped me see a good reason for practicing meditation and for developing wisdom. But you can practice meditation without putting a religious label on it. And there are many different ways to meditate, and if one way isn't working for you, then get creative and find a way that does work for you. And also meditation, it doesn't just mean sitting. It can be standing or walking. And the new album that I have coming out is called Standing with Trees, which is based on my experiences of standing meditation in nature. So I'll end with this final quote by him, which says, "What we are doing may seem insignificant, but this notion of Dharma art will be like an atomic bomb you carry in your mind, and you could play a tremendous role in developing peace throughout the world." Well, I hope this talk has been, helpful, and maybe it'll inspire you to pick up one of Trungpa Rinpoche's books, especially this one if you're an artist or a musician or even a meditator. It applies to all walks of life. I just found it was really good, and especially when applying it to art or music. And it may also inspire you to take on, if you're not a meditator, it might inspire you to take on a daily meditation practice. And maybe if you are an artist, you can, try to see how meditation affects your outlook and your art, and noticing whether or not there is a change. Does creating the art become easier as a result? Does it feel like there's less pressure on you to create something good? Are you more at ease and not worrying about the results? And do you feel good about what you're putting out into the world? So these are questions you can ask along the way. And I'll just leave that for your reflection. And thank you for your time today. I hope it was helpful. Thank you.